Welcome back to the DSR channel. This is week 10, and I'm finally back to the roll videos. This is where we started, and this kind of leans into how I do all the ranking. So actually, it's core to how I do all the ranking. So this is important. And who's more iconic as an archer than Legolas? Although, let me blow your mind for a second. Remember, he was not the ranger in the party, right? Ranger is like an iconic ranged attacker, but Aragorn, the human, was the ranger. Legolas was not a ranger. And to make this a little bit easier to kind of wrap your heads all the way around so you can get a high level view of all the roles simultaneously, I'm going to show this video at the start of, or this table at the start of every one of these videos now, just to help orient everybody. I've already done deep dives on the tank and the frontliner and the skirmisher. I haven't completed all of the skirmisher, but I'm going to go through and do the first video on every one of these right now. I mean, first, and then go back and do the builds and like the follow up, DPR and number crunching calculations on each of them later. So today I want to talk about the ranged role. And let's talk about these columns of this table first, right? So I left a header off. There just wasn't enough room. It would have been too small. So the first column is just the one word name of the role. The second column is the symbol I use when I show maps. The third column talks about the main action you're doing, the main thing you are accomplishing, right? And as a ranged role, your main goal is to do very high single target damage at range. Okay, the next column is like your secondary thing you're trying to achieve, which is for the ranged role, stay out of melee, right? The next column over is just about targeting, specifically about being targeted, right? The tank wants to be targeted. They don't want to be hit, but they do want to be targeted. That's how they protect their allies, right? Uh, and the ranged role wants to avoid being targeted. You do not want to be targeted, okay? And the last column is, and I want to be very, very careful about this and super, super clear. The last column is merely the stereotypical most common classes that are in that role. Okay, that column is not at all about telling you these are the only ones allowed to be in that role. Okay, and roles, we only talk about roles because you've chosen to play this role, not because there's any particular ideal party composition, right? That's not what this is about. There is no ideal party composition. That's not a thing, and that's kind of the antithesis of how to have fun with D&D, okay? But when you create the fantasy for your character, you usually have this idea of how they play, right? And that is heavily, a big part of that is your role, okay? So you've chosen to be ranged. Okay, so this video is talking about what does it mean to be ranged and what are the things you should be looking for, what are the nuances, and how to build it, okay? And the most common classes that you see in this role are fighter, ranger, rogue, and warlock. That is not at all exclusive, particularly when you start factoring in subclasses and feats. There are a lot of ways to build good ranged role characters, okay? And here is my ranking table for every class across every one of the 10 roles. But this, keep in mind, this is only tier 1, specifically level 4, okay? This is not higher level tiers. I do have this table for all that. You can download it on the Google Drive. It's just too much to go over every video, okay? So I just want to give you a taste of where you're starting. And this does not factor in your subclasses, your background, your species, or any feats, okay? And minimally, well, no, not minimally. It factors in your spells, okay? So, but not spells you can pick up other ways. It's only spells that would be part of your class specifically, okay? And this is version 12 of the table. So if you've seen previous versions or downloaded previous versions, you might want to get version 12 because as I work on things, I update and tweak this here and there and refine it. So you might want to get the latest. But you can go right down that ranged column and see how I would rank every one of these classes, just the base class, as a ranged attacker, a ranged damage dealer. And in tier 1, it's like I said, fighter, ranger, rogue, warlock are the best. They all have an A. There's a few C's. I didn't give anyone a B, and a lot of them have D's. Basically, all of the full casters and the artificer all get D's. It's just hard for them to do a high amount of damage to a single target in tier 1. They catch up as their cantrips start scaling up, but they're never A tier based on like cantrips alone. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, and to orient, there's kind of these 4 roles that are generally considered the martial roles, but they are not exclusively martial, okay? I'll get into that when we do specific builds. I just don't want to confuse the whole thing right now. But yeah, you can definitely build all of these using casters. It's just not the most common, okay? So these are the 4 most commonly martial roles. You got range, skirmisher, frontliner, and tank, and they span these two spectrums, right, of offense and defense. So tank has the highest defense, probably the lowest offense, because you're making all of your decisions, all of your choices, your feats, your species, your spells, right, your fighting styles. You're choosing defensive options to make yourself a good tank. uh, and taunt options to make yourself a good tank, right? Frontliner is kind of the balanced one where they make some defensive options so they can stand on the front lines and not get clobbered, and also some offensive options so they deal good damage. Skirmishers are like the glass cannons of melee, right? They go all damage all the time. They just want one feature that lets them run into the melee and get out, right? That's their one non-offensive feature or damage dealing feature. And then they're a skirmisher. And ranged, um, often have the lowest defense and they're the biggest glass cannons. So they stand way far back. That's why it's a glass cannon. You're shooting from far back. You're doing a lot of damage, but you're not built to take the hits. So that's kind of the high level idea, right? But how you build this greatly affects all of that. So don't feel like, oh, well, I can't do that with a ranged attacker if I don't want to, or even if I want to. That's not true. If you want to build some defenses into your ranged attacker, you can. It's just going to come at the expense of the damage you're dealing, right? And your primary job as a ranged damage dealer is damage. But you will very likely at some point reach a point where your damage is good enough and you want to diversify. Okay, you want to start getting different kinds of capabilities, whether they're defensive or just other kinds of things, support, healing, control. It is really good to always diversify your character. Okay, so I just talk about these things hyperbolically. Is that a word? Hyperbolically, meaning I'm only talking about how like exactly what a ranged role is. I am not recommending that you build all your characters that way. Okay. The ideal way to build is diversify to some degree so that you have more things to do more often. I just don't want to confuse that by putting that into every single one of these videos, right? I just want to be focused all the way in on exactly the core elements of this role, and that's the range role we're talking about. And the number one most important thing to do if you're going to be a ranged attacker is before session one, talk with the other players and see if you're going to have enough frontliners. Okay, the ranged attacker role specifically requires frontliners because if nobody's frontliner, then everybody's frontliner. Okay, the monsters walk up to somebody and you're the one that hurts most if they walk up to you, right? If you don't have sharpshooter, then you have disadvantage in all your attack rolls now, and you're like crippled. So you either need like a teleport to get away, or you need sharpshooter. All right, and you need like half the party has to be some kind of frontliner, and tank is a subset of frontliner. So half the party has to be a frontliner slash tank in order for you to be a decent ranged attacker, or you must have sharpshooter. Okay, so the most important thing: talk with the rest of the group before session one. Okay, I can't emphasize that enough. That's why all these roles matter, because some roles rely on other roles but more. Some roles synergize more with other roles. Talk with the rest of your group before you start the session. Make sure everybody's going to have fun. To start off with, the number one reason that you are in the party as a ranged damage dealer is to do damage, right? And you should be doing very, very high damage at range, okay? What is the DPR you want to be at? If you're at level 4 specifically, right there, you want to be in the DPR that's 12 to 18 range. And that is the same range that I gave the frontliner and the skirmisher. And that's because by the time you reach level 4, you actually haven't been able to make you don't have many opportunities to make decisions to choose damage or other things. You get one feat, you get one background, you get one species, you get one class, one subclass, right? So that's not very many decisions or choices you get to start diversifying. As you go higher and higher in levels and tiers, the damage of ranged attackers and skirmishers should start to greatly exceed frontliners, okay? And then the frontliners should greatly exceed the tanks. That just starts to the numbers start to split off the higher level you go. As you make more and more decisions, get more feats, get more spells, that starts to diversify, okay? And then you need to maintain this DPR. This can't be something where, oh, I can do this once per day for one round, then you don't qualify as a good ranged damage dealer, okay? You got to be able to do this all the time, consistently, minimal resource usage, or at least you have enough resources to keep it going for every fight, every round, the whole day. All right, and here's the things you want to consider, okay? And the first 3 bullet points are the same for every damage dealer. You want to maximize your damage per hit. You're looking for features that add damage per hit. You want to maximize your number of attacks, and you want to maximize your chance to hit, right? It doesn't matter if you have a bunch of attacks and they do a bunch of damage. If you don't hit, you do 0 damage, okay? And then there's some sub bullet points I want to put in that are nuances that affect the range damage dealers more often, not necessarily always. Okay, and that is you need to have a good range without getting disadvantaged, right? Because all of the ranged and thrown weapons have a normal range where they make a normal attack, and then they have a long range number, and at long range you have disadvantage. Okay, that's why you always see these 2 range numbers on all of those weapons: normal range and long range, regular attack roll, disadvantage attack roll. Okay, and then the next sub bullet point is that when you are making a ranged attack, you have to deal with cover. Now, you have to deal with cover even on melee attacks. Okay, I know it's probably a shock to people. A lot of people don't realize that. If the cover is between you and the target, the cover applies. Okay, so if you have reach and you're fighting with a reach weapon, and there's somebody in between you and the target, they get cover, right? They get that +2 cover from the creature in between for their attack. It's just melee attackers, frontliners usually are standing next to the enemies, and so this doesn't apply nearly as often. Whereas, ranged, it is in the definition, you are always attacking at range, and if there's somebody in between, it always applies. So be cognizant of that. Here are all of the ranged weapons, both simple and martial ranged weapons, and there's a couple of ones that I want to call out. First up, note that the short bow was moved from martial to simple, right? So, and every class in the game in 2024 was upgraded, I guess, to being proficient with all simple weapons. Like the wizard used to have only a subset of weapons. It was like the quarterstaff, the dart, the light crossbow, I don't know, a couple of other things was all they had access to. I think the sling and the dagger. Right, yeah. I think that was like the sling and the dagger. Yeah, I think that's all they had access to. Now wizards and sorcerers are proficient with all simple weapons, okay? So like if you want to play a ranged blade singer, so you're a bow singer, okay, you don't get proficiency with martial ranged weapons from your subclass as a blade singer, but you already have proficiency with a short bow. So you could, and all the rest of your abilities apply regardless of the weapon you're using. So you could use a short bow as a blade singer and be a bow singer, which, by the way, cool sounding. That's pretty cool. Okay, is your damage going to be awesome? It'll be okay. But if that's the fantasy you want to live, you're going to do fine, right? You're going to do fine. Okay, the other one I want to call out, the other thing I want to call to your attention to here is the column on the weapon masteries, which have a big impact on damage. Okay, so like Vex is your #1 damage dealing weapon mastery that you use or can get access to with ranged weapons. Like slow and push, those are control effects. Those are not damage effects. So if you're going for max damage, Vex is the one you want, especially if you're a rogue. Okay, you need that advantage to land your sneak attack a lot of the time, not always, but a lot of the time. And if you're just flinging darts or shooting a short bow, you're going to give yourself advantage on the next attack. And here we have all of the thrown weapons, all right? This is a subcategory of ranged damage dealer. You don't see these builds nearly as often, probably because there aren't as many feats to support this, but it works fine, and especially with the new bomber feat from Asterian's Book of Hungers, which is not a great feat if you're actually wanting to use it for bombs, because it doesn't help bombs at all. But if you want to be a thrown range damage dealer, you actually really need that. It's great because the biggest problem with thrown weapons as your source of range damage dealing is that their range is very poor. Okay, especially their short range or their normal range, right? Like on the dagger, you see the normal range is 20 feet. So if you throw it beyond 20 feet, you have disadvantage. The hand axe, 20 feet. The only one that's got better than 20 feet is the javelin, and that's 30 feet. Okay, now it's got 120 feet long range, so most of the weapons have a normal range of 20 feet, and then 3 times their normal range is their long range. The javelin has a 30-foot normal range, and then 4 times its normal range is its long range, right? So you get a much more extended long range with that. which is an interesting thing to call out. Also, for all of these weapons, the majority of them are piercing damage. You have two options that are not piercing, and that's the sling and light hammer, which are bludgeoning, by the way, which might be an interesting combo if you want to be a little bit more of a controller, because you can get the crusher feat and push them plus your weapon mastery of like Nick or the dart. No, the sling. Just go back. The sling has slow, right? So if you got crusher and sling, and that's your whole thing, then you are pushing them back 5 feet and slowing them. Kind of cool. All right, but we're not here for that. That's a niche thing. Side topic. Also worth calling out is the trident, right? It is unique among all the ranged weapons or weapons with ranges in that it has topple. So if you can land this on a flying creature, you can, and you knock them prone. Flying creatures, if they don't have hover, fall out of the air immediately, and they immediately fall 500 feet. So if they're less than 500 feet off the ground, they immediately fall and impact the ground for 1d6 damage per 10 feet fallen with a cap of 20. I don't know why there's a cap. The cap doesn't make sense, but nevertheless, there is a cap. Probably just so that PCs don't just get killed by being dropped off a cliff. So if that dragon is 200 feet in the air, well, it's your max range is 60. So if that dragon is 60 feet in the air and you hit them with a trident and knock them out of the air, then they fall 60 feet, take 6d6 damage, and land prone. Okay, good strategy if you're being a ranged damage dealer. Now, that's kind of a control effect, but it adds to your damage. And the fact that it's now prone on the ground could benefit your allies who run up, like your skirmishers, your frontliners, and your tanks, who now run up and have advantage if they're adjacent. Okay. All right. So let's talk about some of the ways you can benefit or build to improve your range damage dealing capabilities. So like I said, there's the bomber feat from Astarian's Book of Hungers. And the long shots feature there is what you're looking for. That removes the disadvantage from the long ranged attack or attacking at long range with your thrown weapons. So now you can throw your daggers at 60 feet, no penalty. You can throw your darts at 60 feet, no penalty. You can throw your javelins 120 feet, no penalty. And if you are attacking with a ranged weapon, which is a crossbow, a bow, a sling, blowgun, things like that, then you want sharpshooter, because the bomber only gives that benefit to thrown weapons. Sharpshooter gives that benefit only to ranged weapons. Okay, so those two benefits don't overlap. And sharpshooter's firing in melee also doesn't benefit ranged attacks with melee weapons, which is throwing them. So firing in melee, you don't benefit from that on the sharpshooter feat if you're throwing weapons. The only thing that benefits you from the sharpshooter feat for throwing weapons is bypass cover, which allows you to ignore cover, which you would really want if you're going to be a thrown damage dealer. And I'm miffed that they didn't just put bypass cover on the bomber feat, right? Why would you do that? Yeah, so now those people who are trying to specialize as thrown damage dealers have to like make this decision of, do I also take sharpshooter too and only get one of the benefits, which I need? It just made things worse for thrown damage dealers. Yeah, which is a bummer, right? I mean, I don't know if it made it worse. It made it more of a conflict, right? Because they just didn't have any way to remove that disadvantage off the long range, and they actually needed that more than removing cover. So they needed that more. So the bomber feat is a net win for damage dealing thrown specialists. Okay, it's a net win. It just feels crappy, and it's more than feels crappy. Like to really be, to compete with like a bow or crossbow specialized damage dealer at range, you've got to take both of these if you're going to be a thrown damage dealer. So you can still make it cool and great. You have a bigger feat tax than the bow and crossbow users, which I think is unfortunate. All right, and speaking of crossbows, if you want to be a really good crossbow damage dealer, you could look at this one. The interesting thing about the crossbow expert is that it removes the loading property from crossbows, okay? Or it allows you to, sorry, more specifically, ignore the loading property. And the loading property is different than the ammunition property. So what the loading property does is it means the implication is that it takes more time because you have to spend extra time loading this thing. And if you know the physics of crossbows, I think you can understand that, yes, that takes a lot more time to pull that bow back, get the bolt in place, put the bow or the string on the notch, and then aim it, right? That's way more time than an arrow out of the quiver and fire, arrow out of the quiver and fire, okay? especially the heavy crossbow. And they did a great demonstration of how a heavy crossbow actually works in Game of Thrones. It was that part when Tyrion is, yes, committing patricide, uh, and he has a heavy crossbow, right? And there's a reason, if you've ever noticed, why the heavy crossbow has that metal kind of horseshoe, square horseshoe thing on the nose of it. You may have wondered, like, why do they have that? That's so that you can lean it down, stick your foot. That's a foot holster, because the heavy crossbow, the bow is so strong, you need the leverage, right? So you put your foot in that holster, and you pull the string back with both hands and put it on the trigger hook, okay? And then you load it and aim it. So the heavy crossbow took even longer to load. Anyway, the loading property, it represents the time it takes to load the weapon. It requires an extra hand, and it prevents you, if you don't have, sorry, if you can't ignore the loading property, then it means with whatever action you're using to attack with this weapon, you can only make one attack. So even if you have extra attack, you don't get extra attack with it. It prevents extra attack. So this is important if you want to be a good damage dealer with a crossbow, and you're a marshal and you've got extra attack. You have to take this. Otherwise, you are nerfing yourself into poor damage because of that. Also, keep in mind that, yeah, if you're going to be and this applies to both the longbow and the heavy crossbow, if you want to use those and do a lot of damage, you got to have the 13 dexterity, or you have disadvantage with those weapons. Okay. Unlike the heavy melee weapons, you need 13 strength or you have disadvantage. Okay. But here's the kind of the gotcha with the heavy crossbow and the longbow. Those are heavy weapons, and they qualify for the extra damage from the Great Weapon Master feat. Okay. But you have a prerequisite of 13 strength to take Great Weapon Master. So you have to have 13 strength, and then Great Weapon Master only gives you +1 strength. So you've now spent a feat that required you to have a lot of strength and only gives you strength. But once you do that, then yes, you now add the Great Weapon Master damage to the attack rolls, to the attacks that hit with your longbow and your heavy crossbow. So it's a great way to boost your damage. You just got to plan for it from the beginning by starting with 13 strength, in addition to like maxing out your dexterity. Okay. This also gives you firing in melee, so that's the same thing that you got that the bow users get from sharpshooter. The dual wielding is an interesting one, and it basically only helps. Not basically, it only helps with hand crossbows. And what it does is, if you're fighting with two weapons, you've got a weapon in one hand and a light crossbow in the other hand, you now get like this dual wielding effect with your light crossbow. And what it does is it allows you still can make the attack that you normally would with a light crossbow. You're making the bonus action attack from the light weapon property with the hand crossbow, and you get to add your ability modifier damage to that attack only if it's a hand crossbow. So it's like giving you the two weapon fighting style plus some other benefits. So this benefits the hand crossbow build the most. But hand crossbow is 1d6 damage, heavy crossbow is 1d10 damage, and heavy crossbow can benefit from Great Weapon Master. So both of those builds are pretty viable. All right. Just light crossbow is not really probably the way to go, right? If you're using a light crossbow, it means you're not specialized. Like if you're going to specialize in the crossbow, go hand crossbow or heavy crossbow. Okay. And these are the fighting styles you're going to want to be looking at. Okay. So if you want to be a thrown weapon specialist, thrown weapon fighting, right? Right in the name. Great job there, WotC designers, right? You want the things to be named as closely as to what they do as possible. Okay. So that adds +2 your damage, which adds up, especially if you're a fighter, right? If you're anybody with extra attack, that's like 2 damage, plus if you get a bonus action attack, plus a reaction attack, which is kind of hard with a thrown weapon. That adds up, right? 4, 6, 8 damage per round. And if you hit with all of them, that's 4, 6, 8 DPR. It's a decent chunk. Archery fighting style, that gives you +2 damage, +2 on your attack rolls with ranged weapons, okay? And there's an interesting crossover here. If you recall, the dart is both a ranged weapon and has the thrown property, so you can get both of these and benefit the dart. So you can have +2 on your attack rolls and +2 on your damage rolls with the dart, which makes it the equivalent of a 1d8 damage weapon. So it goes from being worse than the short bow to the equivalent to equal to the longbow in damage. And if you take bomber, you can now do it at 60 feet. So you're like hitting as hard as a longbow, but only at a range of 60 feet. Okay, kind of cool idea there. All right, and then the two weapon fighting style. You might not think that this applies, but if you're a thrown weapon specialist, you can benefit from two weapon fighting style and just two weapon fighting in general, right? Uh, so you can have now it has to be a light weapon, and a dart doesn't count as a light weapon, which is strange. So, but you could have darts and a dagger, right? So make some attacks with the darts, and then you can use the light weapon property of the dagger to now throw that as a bonus action. And if you get the nick mastery on that dagger, you can now throw it as part of your action and still leave your bonus action available. And if you get the two weapon fighting style, then that dagger thrown dagger attack gets your ability score modifier to the damage, which I know doesn't feel like a lot, but that's your main attack ability, right? So it's going to start at +3, and by the time you're done, it should be a +5 at higher levels, right? So that's 5 damage per round. And if it hits, that's 5 DPR. Okay, so 5 DPR is nothing to. Don't skip on 5 DPR, I guess is what I'm trying to say. All right, so you want that. Next, there's a couple of feats that are kind of like if you really, really, really want more damage, you could lean into these. Okay, Piercer. Yeah, the vast majority of all the ranged and thrown weapons deal piercing damage, and this is a way to raise that damage further. It's not a great way because it doesn't do that much damage, and it's not like guaranteed damage either. So first up is the puncture part, which is once per turn you can re-roll the damage, and you have to take the new roll. Um, so that can add like, I don't know. It varies, but you're probably talking on a D6, you're adding like maybe 1 damage once per round. On a D8, it goes up to like 1.25 damage. On a D10 weapon, I think it's closer to it's over 1.5 damage. I'd have to rerun those numbers, but it's something like that. But it is better than Savage Attacker because it's a re-roll, not a roll twice and choose the higher, right? Because re-roll is better because you can just wait until you roll poorly. So your first attack, you get a 6 or a max die roll, great. Your second attack, you roll really poorly, that's when you use it. So it is slightly better than Savage Attacker. Although I hate that last clause on there that says you must use the new roll. Unnecessary. Like this is not a big damage increase, guys. Totally unnecessary, and it nerfed this feat even further because what if you rolled a 3 and you decide to re-roll it and get a 1? So not only did it lower your damage to do this, but now you have this like really bad feel bad moment from a feat that you took, right? You spent one of your few feat choices on this and it made you feel bad. Completely unnecessary. If they just left that off and just say you get a re-roll and still choose the highest of the two, still would have been maybe a low for range damage dealers, a low B tier feat. Not nothing even close to A, certainly not S, okay? They should have left that off. And if you're like DMs out there, I recommend just leave that off and ignore it. You know, if somebody takes a piercer feat, just let them have that. It's not a great feat, and just make them feel a little bit better about it. All right, but that's not raw, okay? Enhanced critical, yeah, you're gonna boost your damage whenever you crit. If you can spec for crits, it helps a little more. The problem is that specking for crits is never, on average, gonna be a significant damage increase. But when you crit, and crits are great from the sense of it's an awesome feel good moment. They happen 3 or 4 times total for the PCs in a combat, and when they happen, they feel great, and this is going to add to that feel great moment. So it's still worth it because that part of it actually feels. So here's the irony: the puncture part helps more than you think, and just doesn't feel great. I mean, it is helping more than it feels. And the enhanced critical is the opposite. It doesn't help as much as you think. Like the mechanics, the statistical mechanical benefit of it is not very high, but it feels great. So yeah, there's the piercer feat. And then you have poisoner, which will allow you to take dexterity as the increase. And poisoner is probably the bigger damage boost. It probably is a much bigger damage boost than piercer. It's just really expensive. And yeah, like 200 monsters are immune to poison. So a quarter of the time, you can't use it. And with how expensive it is, maybe you don't want to, you know? And then those other fights where you can use it, you're just going to be killing monsters, like wrecking monsters by adding 2d8 damage. You're going to have to spend your bonus action. So as long as you don't have a better use for your bonus action, then this is great. So if you have Hunter's Mark or Hex, don't take Poisoner. Speaking of those spells, here they are. These are great damage dealing boosts for ranged attackers and two weapon fighting melee attackers too. These apply on every attack roll, so regardless if it's an attack with a spell or a weapon, both of these benefit. Um, and the more attacks you make, the more benefit you get from them. So if you're attacking only once or twice per round, this is probably not worth your concentration and whatever it took for you to get the spell. Okay. If you're attacking 3 or 4 times per round, this is fantastic. These are fantastic and scale with you as you get more attacks. So, I mentioned that you can make spellcaster ranged attackers who are quite good. Yeah, the warlock. I remember I listed that. The warlock is that one, right? They can cast Eldritch Blast without resource expenditure, so they can do it every round all day long. They can put Hex on it to boost the damage, and the damage is 1d10. You get Agonizing Blast, so it's 1d10 plus your Charisma modifier, which is +3 to +5 as you scale up in levels. And then you add 1d6 from Hex. Your every hit is 1d10 plus 1d6 plus 3, 4, or 5. That you're doing solid damage at that point. And Eldritch Blast scales, right? Level 5, you get 2 attacks. Level 11, you get 3 shots with it. And level 17, you get 4 shots with Eldritch Blast. Okay? It's and Hex lasts 1 hour unless you upcast it to 3rd level, and then it's 8 hours. Then you upcast it to 5th level, it's 24 hours. So that is how the warlocks can just cast this once, keep it going all day, and their damage output is going to be solid, not amazing. I don't know if it's, probably A tier in that range. It's going to be good enough. The problem is it takes your concentration, so you won't be doing anything else. That's the trade-off. Hunter's Mark, same thing. It really boosts your damage. Hunter's Mark is why +2 weapon fighting is why Rangers are the best damage dealers in tier 1. Like they just beat everybody else in damage. Unfortunately, they don't keep up with that. So they start they're kind of like equal to everybody in tier 2, and then tier 3 they fall behind. Tier 4 they're further behind. So, but these are great depending on how many attacks you're making. Like if you're a rogue, don't get these. Right? You're making 1 attack and it's a big hit, and you're going to add 1d6 to that with these. Not worth it. Not worth the setup. It's better for you to use your bonus action to hide or steady aim to get advantage, and then land your 1 big attack is a way better use of your bonus action than casting these spells and moving these spells around. All right, now we're most of the way done with this, right? So we're just going to clean up some of the nuances of this. All right, so staying out of melee. Yes, you want to stay out of melee. And yes, you can spec for some of that kind of stuff. Having some bonus action disengage options or bonus action teleport, misty step kind of things. You can do that. You can get feats to help you with that if you don't already have it as part of your class or subclass or species. But it's far less important for you to get those than it is for the skirmisher. Like the skirmisher has to have something like that, or they're not going to be a good skirmisher. They're going to get wrecked as they run in and out of melee. All right, you don't have that problem. You're shooting from range, so it is generally better if you're going to be a range damage dealer to just max out your damage first, right? Your first 3 feats should be like sharpshooter or bomber, crossbow expert if you need it, piercer, poisoner, get those fighting styles, max out your dexterity. Do that first before you start worrying about additional mobility options. You don't even need more movement most of the time. Most of the time, just standing back and having that 30-foot movement speed is going to take care of you, right? And you're not going to need additional options until higher tiers anyway, which is when you have more room, more feat choices to choose those things. So yeah, just kind of your basic tactical staying back. And that kind of is just more intuitive for most people. Most of the time, I don't see anybody struggling with the idea of standing back, standing around corners, getting out of the way if you're a ranged attacker. So easy one, intuitive to deal with. Avoid targeting, same kind of concept, right? Yes, move around corners, hide behind things. Don't be a jerk though and hide behind your allies, especially if they're like the wizard and the sorcerer or the healer. Okay, you are a martial, right? You have more hit points. You probably have better AC. You probably have a lot of things. You're still tougher than them. And if you stand in front of them, you will cause enemies who try to target them half cover, right? Which gives +2 to their AC. So even if you just stand in front of those backliner allies, you're helping them by giving them cover, right? And even if the enemy targets you instead, you got more hit points, and you're probably not, your concentration isn't nearly as important as those backliners' concentrations, okay? So even though you're trying to stay out of line of sight, you should also always be trying to help your allies, which means maybe you don't run around the corner. Maybe you stand in front of the wizard because they couldn't get out around the corner. Okay. But also, if you have a reaction that you want to be using, if you are out of line of sight, you probably can't use your reaction. Okay. If you've got silvery barbs or absorb elements, right? You can't use those. I mean, you can, yeah, you can use absorb elements even if you're out of line of sight, but silvery barbs, you can't, right? If you have that and your plan is to be helping your allies with that, well, if you can't see your allies or the one who's targeting your allies, you can't help them with that. Okay. If you have other reactions, you're now out of position to help with those things. So keep that in mind. And finally, tactical nuances. Okay. One of the big differences, even though both the skirmisher and the range damage dealer, like your number one job is do max damage. Okay. If you're not doing good damage, then you're kind of like failing at your basic job, right? If this was Deadpool 2 and you're in that scene where they're interviewing more superheroes for their team, they'd be like, oh, what role are you? And you're like, oh, I'm a range damage. You're like, great. What's your DPR? Well, it's crappy. They're like, well, then why are you here? Right? You're like Peter. I guess Peter got on the team anyway, though, but that's why it's Deadpool. Um, so, okay. So the big difference between you and a skirmisher, though, is the skirmisher is going to have a much harder time of hitting the high value targets and reaching them. Okay. But you don't, right? There's a mage in the back. You just target them and start blasting them. Now, the thing that works against that, you have to balance both of these, is coordinate your focus fire. If you're not going to kill that mage with these attacks and he's not or she is not concentrating on something, then that might not be worth what you're doing. Even though they're blasting you with fireballs, it doesn't matter that you did some damage to them if you're not going to kill them. It's usually better to focus fire and take something off the board than it is to just deal some damage to somebody in the back row, but not inhibit them in any way. Right? But if you have control effects like Ranger ensnaring strike, and that restrained effect is going to stop that caster from, or inhibit that caster in some way, like they've got a strong ranged attack feature or cantrip or spell, and restraining them inhibits that, then yeah, hit them, get off your ensnaring strike on that mage in the back. And always keep in mind, help your backliner allies. Like I was saying, like that's part of your job, right? Which is why I don't like the Winter Walker Rangers 15th level ability, where you can like kind of go partially ghost form and then sink into the floor. Okay, you're not helping anybody. Okay, you're a full marshal, but you're not helping your allies. You're being kind of like that jerk member of the party who's like, screw you guys. You're like flipping everybody off as you sink into the ground. Like, I don't care if you guys live or die. I'm safe. It's a jerk move. Sometimes it might be the right thing. Like if all of your other backliner allies are untargetable because they all ran around the corner, then sure, go ahead and do that, right? Because your frontliners, that's part of their job, right? Is to take some hits. Fine, go ahead and do it that day. And then in those moments, it'll be cool. Lean into it, have fun. But if you got like your squishy wizard and like a divine soul sorcerer healer, and that's, and they're both squishy and they're standing right there, and you're like, good luck, guys, and you sink into the floor, then you're being the jerk in the group, right? This is about the group winning, not you winning. Like, because if all of your allies are killed by the monsters, but you survive, did you win? Right? Winning is a group thing, not an individual thing. All right. All right. So I don't like that. That one. All right. Let's go to a tactical map and see some of this. Okay, here's another just randomly generated dungeon I am playing this week and probably next week for my Diablo dungeon one shots that I do, which are just like they're actually quite fun. It's combat and exploration, zero social encounters. Like, don't plan a character who's good at social encounters. There isn't any. But I do say you still have to role play, right? Role play during combat, role play during exploration. It is a ton of fun. People get into the role play. It is fantastic, right? You don't need gimmicks to make combat good. You just need to keep role playing, and then it's awesome. Okay, so and this is similar. Like, I guess my players, this is the downside, guys. If you don't watch my videos the day they come out, because this is revealing some of the map that you haven't seen yet. Y'all probably won't see this until after you've already gone through these areas. So, guess you should have watched it sooner. Okay, so we've got two frontliners up there next to these cloakers. We've got a healer in the party, and we've got a ranged attacker in the party, and we've got a skirmisher. Okay, so the ranged attacker, yeah, there's the doorway right there, which is tempting to just say run over here between your attacks so that you can't be targeted, right? You can't be hit by that mage's spells. You can't be targeted by that beholder's eye rays. But the healer in the party they've got silvery barbs. They've got other reaction spells and abilities. Maybe they're a light cleric, right? where they've got that reaction to cause disadvantage on somebody attacking one of their allies. They have to stay in range to do that, so they can't run out of the room. Okay, and if the healer can't run out of the room, then you're just leaving them as a target, right? You run out of there, a skirmisher ran out of there, and now there's the two frontliners who are beefy, and you have this healer who's maybe not as beefy, definitely not as beefy as the frontliners. And of course the beholder and the mage are at least as smart as the PCs, so they're going to be like, "Yep, kill the healer." Right? The one person standing there, he's going to use all his eye rays on the healer, and if that healer gets disintegrated or petrified, you guys are in a lot of trouble, right? The mage, right? They've got crowd control spells, they've got really good damage attacks. So at the very least, just stand in front of the healer, right? The healer probably is causing saving throws, so you're not going to inhibit the healer in any way. In fact, it doesn't matter, because on their turn, if they really wanted to make an attack roll, they just move over and move back, okay? But they still have line of sight on all of their allies to help them, and you are causing half cover, which, remember, gives a +2 to their dexterity saving throws as well, and several of the beholder eye rays are dexterity saving throws. So you're still helping your ally against the beholder eye rays, right? And the mage's really strong ranged attack. Okay. And you're probably a lot tougher than that healer and the skirmisher. You're the toughest backliner, right? Because you're like a ranger or a fighter. Okay. So help your allies. Don't be the Winter Walker jerk and sink into the floor. Don't be the guy who's just like, well, good luck, and run out of the room. That's not cool, right? This is a team sport. This is group fun. And yes, your allies are going to resent you. Your friends in real life are going to probably resent you if you did that and then the healer is petrified or disintegrated, right? Because this is things that affect things in game affect the humans who are playing those things, right? So you might be hurting your friendship with a real person by doing things like that, okay? Always keep that in mind. There are real people behind what's happening on the map, okay? So while I think it's fun and encourage people to have a little bit of rivalry, I always caution to remember, keep the rivalry playful, and make sure everybody's on board. Do not be like insulting the healer, because that's what your lone wolf skirmisher would do. If the healer's not into it, if you're hurting their feeling, like that person's maybe having their feelings hurt, and they're not appreciating this rivalry in game. Always make sure everybody's on board with whatever you're doing, okay? Because it's a game. Yeah, so there you go. Always keep in mind, though, as a ranged attacker as well, cover. Your frontliner allies are going to be causing cover for you to attack the monsters. If you make this shot from right here and you're trying to shoot the archmage, yes, that mage has cover, both from your frontliner and the cloaker. Now, rules as written, cover does not stack. They only get the benefit of the strongest form of cover, and creatures only cause half cover. Only objects cause 3/4 or total cover, okay? So there could be 20 creatures in between you and the target, and it's still half cover, okay? All right, but your frontliner is causing half cover, the cloaker is causing half cover. So if you want to try to target that mage, you got to, even if you move over there, that cloaker is still in the way. And maybe that's the wrong thing to do. Maybe this cloaker, right, especially in this scenario, because this skirmisher, maybe they have a bonus action dash. They cannot get past these things unless they're flying off the ground. You cannot cut corners like this past monsters. Rules is written, you cannot. Okay? So maybe the right move is for this to help this frontliner kill that cloaker real fast. Maybe that cloaker is pretty low and you just finish it off, right? Maybe you have one more attack left. You move over here, you hit the archmage, that mage, and then you make space by killing that cloaker for your skirmisher to run in and finish off that mage, right? That is the right move to do as a group, which is why you should always be strategizing and planning both during your rounds, but also during session 0, right? Here is another huge problem with ranged attackers that I see, is that like everybody in the party decides to be ranged or backliner, and nobody is a frontliner. And the ranged damage dealer suffers the most from that, right? Because a lot of the time, backliner spellcasters, they do an armor dip, they do something, and they're kind of like decently tough anyway. And they cast saving, their spells that they're mostly relying on cause saving throws. So it doesn't matter to them that much if an enemy runs up to them, because it doesn't cause any disadvantage on most of their spells they're using. But for you, it's a big deal. If you don't have sharpshooter and they run up to you, you have disadvantage on all of your ranged attack rolls. Yeah. So before the session, before the campaign, discuss as a group and make sure, hey, if you want to be a ranged attacker specifically, make sure that there are at least half the party is a frontliner, or they're not going to be able to keep the enemies away from you, and you are not going to really be a ranged attacker. So, all right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. If you don't have enough D&D in your life, join me on Discord or find me and play games with me on Start Playing Games. And when you play D&D with your friends, remember to be cool. It's a game. It's for fun.